Hey, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Late Night Happy Hour. Brian Kamenetzky and Andy Kamenetzky. Really excited. We got a good show tonight. We'll talk a little bit about the Rams. Andy, dominant performance from the Rams at the SoFi tonight.
That's one of those games, Brian, that you really feel for there being no fans beyond knowing the reason there's no fans, because
there's that
damn pandemic going on and it doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. If anything, the numbers are spiking and getting worse, and these vaccines cannot arrive.
I think people know what's going on. Sure.
No, but I'm just saying, like, you know everything that's going on, but like you feel for there being no fans, because that's really one that they would have enjoyed watching, because A, you get the Rams just dominating this game from start to finish, and B, you get a little bit of Super Bowl revenge. I know it's not the exact same thing.
It's not the exact same thing.
But you're still beating Bill Belichick and the Patriots. I guarantee Rams fan like LA Rams FC right now in the chat, he's happy with it.
Right. He says, he just noticed on Twitter, says we should have invited Jordan Rodriguez, who, by the way, is coming next week, honoring what she said about showing back up for Jets week.
We can't invite Jordan tonight.
She's working.
Yeah. She has things to do.
Right. I mean, she's like actually working tonight. It's Thursday Night Football. She's writing about this game, and everybody should go read about it at
You
The
should
Athletic.
be grateful that she can't be on this show tonight.
Exactly.
Because otherwise you wouldn't be getting her coverage.
Coming up, we have a couple things we want to get into. We'll talk about the Paul George extension, which a lot of Lakers fans are enjoying tonight. We will try to give some perspective on that. It's even setting aside Paul George from this, it says so much about the way we look at players and the game is kind of perceived. So we'll do that before we're done. And the big feature tonight, we spoke to Bernardo Ruiz, who is the director of the new 30 for 30, which debuts next week. It's called The Infinite Race. It is, like most 30 for 30s, Andy, it is an outstanding documentary. It's about this ultra marathon in one of the most remote parts of Mexico that it kind of has drawn people from the outside, seeking all kinds of different things, and the relationships that they develop with the local people, the native people of that region, this group of people who are known for their distance running. These sort of almost have like a mythical quality about the way that they run distances. So our conversation with Bernardo Ruiz is going to be coming up in just a few minutes. But let's talk more about this game tonight, because like you say, it doesn't exactly substitute for winning a Super Bowl, but it does.
No, I'm willing to say the 9th win of the regular season does not equal a Super Bowl.
Not 1-to-1.
What was it, 2017? 2018?
This was this game to me kind of, it was like a microcosm of a lot of the things that I love about the Rams, and also the thing that still worries me. But like, you go out and the Rams did exactly, Andy, what in the 24-3 win tonight at SoFi over the Patriots, exactly what you would want them to do. They had the ball first. They scored on their opening drive. They get out a little bit ahead, 17-0 and all that. And they basically just never let New England in the game. They relied on their defense. They relied on their running game, and they got out of here with an easy win. That's all I had to say about that.
Oh, okay. It felt like you were soliloquying up to something.
And it did, and it stopped at and got out of there with an easy win. I think I caught you again. This happened at the end of the last show or a couple.
No. You caught me sending a tweet.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
I thought you were doing like, I caught you sending, I think, we have to tweet during the show. We have to put out the.
Okay, I thought you were referring to there was a recent show. Actually, it was the Land of Lakers podcast where you asked me some closing thoughts, and I was too busy watching football.
Oh, okay. That was basically what I was thinking of.
Right. No, you
were doing our social media work.
Right. I was doing work for the show. Right. I mean, first of all, the big takeaway from the game, I think, was Cam Akers. The performance that he had tonight. 171 yards, 29 carries. plus 2 catches for 23 yards, 5.9 yards per carry. And if the rest of the team, if you count Jared Goff's 4 rushes, 8 combined, including the
it was the Cam Akers show,
right? Including the one obligatory sweep for Robert Woods, which I believe is a contract stipulation that he gets 1 per game, 1 jet sweep. It's spelled out in his contract, and it's funny because this is something, Brian, that you and I have talked about on a few occasions over the course of the season. I've also brought it up with Jordan Rodrigue, who again is going to be on with us next week. I've also brought it up with Lindsey Theory, Ted Wynn. I've wondered what it would look like if the Rams would just turn over their running game to one guy. Not that the Rams haven't been running the ball this year, because they have. They've done it reasonably successfully. They've done it with a lot of volume. And the 3 running backs that they have, Akers, Darrell Henderson, and Malcolm Brown, they've all had good performances in the ways that they've been used, but it's never really been one guy. And I've wondered at times if that's prevented any of them from getting the maximum rhythm they potentially could get in a game, like really finding their best groove. And we saw the beginning of this last week with Cam Akers getting 21 carries, and obviously that increased tonight. I'm going to be very curious to see where this goes from here. Like if he really becomes the guy.
I think, when Henderson was, came into the game, I guess a little dinged up.
Sure. And that happened with Akers during the season too, but
it looks, certainly I will say 2 things. First, they're going to run the ball a lot next week, because the game plan for next week is similar to you're playing a really bad Jets team. I mean, obviously as bad as a team can be, that doesn't have an offense, similar to New England not having any kind of real dynamic offense. And all you need to do is, if with that defense, get up by 14 points and do what they did at the beginning of the third quarter. Was that a 9-minute drive? I mean, the game was that was one of the most impressive stretches where, you have a team that may be able to still kind of get in. You let, New England's playing as well as they've played all year coming into this game, which isn't good, but it's still better. But the Rams just never gave them a chance, and they did it all on the ground. It's going to be the same way next week against the Jets. Because if they can get up by 14 against them, they're not going to come back. You wonder what happens past that, if they, assuming they beat the Jets, and I think they will, do you keep running the ball against Arizona again? I don't really know the rest of the schedule in front of me, into the playoffs and all that kind of stuff. Is this the sort of game plan where they really shift from being a team that throws the ball maybe a little bit more than people would like to a true run heavy kind of thing, which you've done a little bit, but not like it was tonight.
Yeah. I mean, and Cam Akers just dominated in this game. I mean, he had a lot of runs where he broke off long chunks of yardage.
I mean, he averaged 6 yards a carry. You're doing something right.
Right. He was breaking tackles. I mean, I just want to make sure people understand this wasn't like front loaded by a couple long runs. Like he really, from start to finish, was just consistently getting yardage. You could see too, I thought he did a great job reading the way plays were breaking, being patient at times, finding the right hole to get to. I mean, he really looked good in this game. And I'm just curious to see what it looks like with, one guy having more of that solidified role. I don't even mean it in a way that's critical of Sean McVay. I mean, I've said before that I wish that he would involve these guys more in the passing game. But I'm not getting on him that I don't think he's run the ball enough, because I think they've run the ball.
They've run the ball plenty.
Right, exactly. I'm not being critical of that at all. I've been curious just what it would look like where you really give the majority of responsibility to one guy, just to see if any of them would really be capable. Part of the reason they haven't always been able to do it is, at least in terms of really the workload, is Malcolm Brown plays third downs, not because he's the best receiver, because he's the best blocker. Yeah. And so, they were, as they say, Andy, ahead of the sticks all night tonight. And so, you didn't need Malcolm Brown in there on third down. You didn't have a lot of third and long, and all this other stuff. The defense was dominant against a bad offensive team. And you had, first and, second and 4, third and 1, and they didn't need Jared Goff to do anything. And
for better or for worse, and it's probably not something you want to rely on in a playoff game against Green Bay or other teams that can put up a lot of points. But for better or for worse, they are better when it doesn't matter if Jared Goff is good.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are games where he plays well. He had a good game against Arizona.
Not terrible.
The week before. No, I'm not saying that you're saying he's terrible. My point is he is capable of this season having those type of games for all of the up and down that's been there with Goff. And, you and I were texting a little bit back and forth about this game. And, my impression of the Rams this season, and tonight really solidified it, is they can be maddeningly inconsistent and at times inexplicably inconsistent. And when that happens, they can hit a pretty stark
Go ahead and finish. I actually don't think it's inexplicable, but go ahead.
It will
it's quite explicable.
Well, I guess, but
it's Jared Goff. It's not. It's frustrating. I get the maddening part and I get the frustrating part, but it's not inexplicable. It's Jared Goff's performance.
Okay, I guess inexplicable in the sense that at times you wonder what the hell is going on. Just get it together, man. But either way, what my point was, their floor can look really stark at times when things aren't going well or they just don't seem to find that gear. But when things are going well, this team's got a really high ceiling. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're legit. And that defense, I remember the first half of the season, they looked really good, but there was that question of, okay, you guys have played a few NFC East teams. Like, is this real? We're going to see it during the second half. It's real. This defense is
the defense, absolutely
fantastic.
Yeah, no question. You look at it, they win next week and they're in. And again, I just am not going to sit here and say that a Rams team that can get themselves into the playoffs with a victory is going to lose to the Jets.
Look, that's the reason why they're not going to finish this week at the top of the NFC West, because the team that they need to stay ahead of, Seattle, plays the Jets. And the Jets don't let people beat them. Like, it's as an aesthetic, as an MO this season, they will not let you lose. Like, it's just not what they do.
Help us, help you.
Oh, they're going to find a way to lose the game. I promise you that. So the Rams in Seattle are going to finish this weekend 9-4. Like, that's going to happen.
Yeah. So that part's going to work. It very much looks like they're going to make the playoffs. And that in and of itself is, sorry, somebody noted that I had the wrong score in my tweet, which is true. It was 24-3, not 24-7. That in and of itself is exceeding a little bit. I mean, I thought they could make the playoffs this year, but I was very concerned about what this team could be.
I was much
and they're good. And like, they are legit. They're legitimately good in a NFC where, maybe the Saints, especially when Drew Brees comes back, they've been very good, even with Taysom Hill at quarterback.
There's limits to it, though.
Yeah, I would agree. You're better with Drew Brees, I think. Yeah, it's they're still going to do stuff with Hill, but other than maybe the Saints, the Packers are good, but they're not flawless. The Seahawks are good, but they're not flawless. But it does look like, though, you have a lot of teams, because like the Packers defense is starting to get better as that offense has been really good. The Seahawks defense is starting to get better. It does seem like there are a few teams that are getting to that sort of more playoff elite level, while, by the way, the Buccaneers seem to fall to shit, which is going to make some people happy. You do see Rams, Seahawks, Packers, Saints as kind of an emerging elite, as Kyler Murray's injury drags down the Cardinals, and the Vikings are just kind of the Bears became the Bears, and the Bucs just aren't that great.
Vikings have been a little better lately, but they're not going to scare anybody.
Someone's going to make the Giants maybe win that division, maybe Washington does,
but it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. The other thing that stuck out in this game, this was a very
really quick before you get to this point, because we were just talking about the different teams and who could potentially pose the biggest challenge to the Rams in the NFC. You were talking about Seattle, their defense starting to get better, and they're bunched right now. They're going to be bunched together in terms of the standings. The Rams have played Seattle very well
Oh yeah,
over the last few years. Like if
and
that
Arizona.
one, yeah, I mean,
You know,
but they've been very, very good against the Seahawks. Like it's just a team that they do well against.
so I mean, they're going to make the playoffs, so that part is going to work out well. But before we get to our interview with Bernardo Ruiz, the other storyline in this game was the sadness. If you are a person who likes Cam Newton, or at the very least, even just respects what Cam Newton has accomplished in the NFL, this was a really sad game.
Yeah.
Because I had high hopes, you had high. I think everybody wanted him to be really good. I think people thought there was a chance. He goes in with Bill Belichick, and it just kind of works out. And he's able to resurrect his career and kind of stick it to some people, quite frankly, who don't like him because he does the Superman thing, or he, wears funny hats, or whatever it might be, or because he's black, or whatever it might be, however you want to slice and dice it, because often those things are related to each other.
Indeed.
But 9 of 16, 119 yards, sacked 4 times. He's not working with a lot there. I mean, if you're not a fantasy football player and can name 3 wide receivers for New England, you spend too much time watching football. But it's not there anymore. And it is the effort that it takes for him to throw and get the ball to people. And it's hard. It's really hard to watch. And he eventually was replaced by Jarrett Stidham in the fourth quarter. I kind of understood why. It's just been sad on that front.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you that there's been a lot of ways that Cam Newton, over the years that have been well publicized, that he's just been polarizing for reasons that aren't fair to him at all. But at the same time, man, my biggest concern with him, even though there had been that optimism and, he's obviously in a great setting when it comes to coach, and he clearly needed to get out of Carolina, that had run its course. But I always have these concerns with athletes when you start seeing them breaking down, and you just wonder if you've reached a point where your body won't cooperate anymore. Like right. I remember when Kobe,
absolutely.
When Kobe, for example, when he tore his Achilles, obviously that was the stark beginning of the end. But the truth is, we were starting to see gradual signs of not a decline necessarily in his play, but in a decline in terms of Kobe being able to play through anything. That ability, just his body can hold up no matter what, because Kobe was renowned for this ability to, play with an ankle swollen up the size of a grapefruit, stuff like that.
Sometimes he would actually do it on purpose. Like he would bash his own body parts until they would swell up just so he could do it.
Oh, I remember my running joke when Steve Blake got the chickenpox and couldn't play. Kobe used to take Steve Blake and rub Blake up against him because he's like, chickenpox are wasted on this guy. I want the ability to play through chickenpox. Nobody cares if Steve Blake has a chickenpox game, but they care if Kobe does. But there comes a point where your body just can't do it anymore. Kobe actually, we talked about this a couple of days with Scott Feinberg from the Hollywood Reporter. He actually acknowledged that in Dear Basketball. The poem, just, that his body won't allow it anymore. And I remember when Kobe was attempting to make that comeback from the Achilles, and we would get asked a lot, do you think this is possible? And my standard response was, if anybody can do this, Kobe can. I'm just not convinced anybody can do it. And I think that's what we're seeing with Cam Newton right now. His body has been through so much. He just, no matter how much will is there, how much desire, inherent skill, whatever, he just can't do it anymore.
You can tell when a guy Tom Brady wasn't working with much last year with the Patriots either, and he suffered because of it. He didn't look as good as he normally does. But you can tell when it's the guys around the quarterback and not just the quarterback. Deshaun Watson is not working with much in Houston either, with the Texans. And is clearly still awesome. Like he's doing superhuman stuff.
He's been fantastic.
Just to make that offense look like even kind of competent requires him to do kind of superhuman stuff. Cam can't. And the part that really made me saddest about all of it was because the offense around him is limited. No question. Better weapons, Cam would look better. I get that. But because they're limited and he's limited, all that's actually really left for them to do and McDaniels to call are different running plays where Cam can use his size and run the ball a little bit and whatever, which only adds to the abuse that keeps him from being good. It's sort of like all he has left.
There was that sequence early in the game where the Patriots were near the Rams end zone and they called 2 consecutive running plays.
Yeah, this was, by the way, this was basically the ball game. This is the goal line stand the Rams made. I think they were up 17-0 at that point, or it might have been 17-3. I forget.
I don't remember the exact.
This was the ball game.
But they went 3rd and goal, 4th and goal, 2 plays that involved Cam Newton running, and he could barely move, and you could see the hesitation in the way he was reacting to things and the decisions that he was making, because in his head, the sequence is playing out quicker than the way this actually is. It's not there for him anymore. As somebody that really enjoyed watching Cam Newton play at his MVP level and thought he was just really fun and potentially reinventing the position and, the things that he did, the athleticism at his size, it's brutal to watch. There was a play, I don't know if you caught this, but there was a pass that he threw in the second half of this game, and it was way wide. And you actually heard him go like, "Ah!" during the pass, because he was laboring just to throw. And it's awful to watch. It really is, man. Like, when this happens to great athletes, when their bodies betray them, it's really awful. It's very, very humanizing to see in ways that, just tough to watch.
Yeah, it happens especially guys who are, use their bodies in the way that Cam Newton has. I just feel like he sort of deserves better. Because he's a good guy too. I mean, one of the other things we talked about with Jordan before the season started, like, she's a fan of the person. Like, she got to cover him in Carolina and understands kind of what he was there as a human being in the community. And for all the sort of the flash and this and that with the controversy around him. And so you get a feel for people that way. And he's a fun guy to watch. So anyway, great game for the Rams overall. Yes. Breakout game for Cam Akers. I loved this game from a Sean McVay's perspective. Like, when you sit here and talk about coaches that, guys have to do it their way. I would like, if you would have said the Rams are going to win games with 2 tight ends on the field and running the ball 29 times with their rookie running back, all this other stuff, like, that's not the Rams offense 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It is now when they need, and kudos to Sean McVay for adjusting to what his team needs, what works and all that stuff. That's the sign of a really great coach. It's not the guy who makes everybody do things their way with their system. It's the guy who adjusts what's effective to who is on his actual roster.
Nobody's been better at that than Bill Belichick.
Yeah, exactly. It's what makes Pop great. It makes Belichick great. Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
I was going to say, for all of Bill Belichick's dictatorial reputation, and it has been in a lot of ways his way or the highway, broadly speaking, with that organization, because he's had an incredible amount of power there. But he has not been, he's not been a purist when it comes to his system, and he's been actually remarkably flexible.
There have been years where they threw the ball all over the park, where they ran the ball a ton, where they relied on their defense. They do it in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll get to Paul George here also in a minute. This is something we've never done, Andy, on this show, on the Late Night Happy Hour. We have been playing around with the capabilities of the machine. And
we want to offer everybody more options. We want to offer our audience different, more variety or more potential in terms of the guests that we can bring in, acknowledging that this show is late on the West Coast, much less middle of the country or the East Coast.
So, in an effort to be able to get people on, like Andy says, great guests on the East Coast, writers and entertainers, whoever it might be, just really good people on the show. One of the things we can do now, we can actually record things ahead of time, which we did with this week with Bernardo Ruiz. He is a 2-time Emmy Award winning, or excuse me, Emmy Award nominated documentary maker. He has credits with HBO, PBS, and ESPN now with 30 for 30, The Infinite Race. As we mentioned before, it is a fascinating story about this ultra marathon that takes place in the Copper Canyon in Mexico, with the Tarahumara or Raramuri people and these, outsiders, foreigners from, not just in, Mexico, but, coming from America, coming from Europe and all these places to participate in this race. So we had a chance to talk to him. This is we're going to play the trailer for the film to give you an idea kind of what the movie is. And then we'll bring you the interview, the conversation itself.
Kaka Honskana chi Raya in the Arwem, Uhumam in Nimaria in the Habre. Hemshi Memko, Unska Honcho, Udum Kampa.
The Tarahumarans are among the world's most primitive Indians and among the world's best long-distance runners.
They are a Smithsonian exhibit come to life. But there's a guy named Caballo Blanco who's been living down the bottom of the canyons for years and set up a 50-mile race. I wrote about it, but what Caballo would later say was a world-class event down here in the middle of nowhere.
All the runners from around the world, they were there because they read the book Born to Run. It was almost like they had all read the Bible and they were following their pilgrimage to the sacred place.
Correr es la resistencia ante la imposición, una gran parte de nuestra identidad, pero los ultras maratones para mí no forman parte de la cultura. Es un trabajo más de agradecimiento que por algo, por una meta.
Hay dos grandes cárteles operando, despojándoles de su territorio ancestral.
Te tienes que huir antes de que te maten.
Muertos por allá, muertos por acá, o sea, estaba muy feo.
There are truckloads of armed men rolling into town.
En eso llega Silvino, y yo lo abrazo, lloro, y le digo a Silvino, ¿qué vamos a hacer? Y me dice, correr.
Somos un mundo diferente, pero podemos entender a este mundo que está aquí también. Si el mundo no deja de hacer rotación, tenemos que correr.
All right, so that is the Infinite Race. Again, we spoke to Bernardo Ruiz earlier this week, and I started that by asking him. Oops. Oh man.
What?
I accidentally hit play. We're doing so well. Oh no, that's the YouTube thing that's still going. Anyway, sorry about that. So we spoke to Bernardo Ruiz, the director of this film, earlier this week, and I started the interview asking him just what drew him to this project that you've told her. What drew you to it initially?
There are a couple of things that drew me to this story. One is I'd always wanted to make a running film. When I was a teenager, I saw, it was a late night airing of The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, the British film. It's from 1962. I saw it on cable. I was 17 years old and I saw it on cable. I think it was the IFC channel, and I loved it. It was a film about kind of bucking authority, standing up for what you believe in. And of course, those themes resonated for me as a, stubborn 17-year-old. And then, most of my career I've been covering the relationship between the U.S. and Mexico, and I've done a lot of stories that touch on organized crime or the cartels, what we call the cartels. And so, those two things were floating around, and I read this extraordinary piece of journalism, this article that appeared in the Texas Monthly called "The Drug Runners," and it's basically a story about how organized crime has been conscripting or exploiting Tarahumara runners to ferry drugs into the U.S. Great piece by Ryan Goldberg, and so that kind of sparked. I thought, my God, we can put these two things together, and these two, running film and a kind of film about power and drugs and all this other stuff. And I began collaborating with Ryan and ESPN to try to make a documentary about this subject.
That's interesting. The way running spoke to you, as a teenager, and I guess speaks to you now. Just that idea of that stubbornness and doing your own thing, because it's an actual theme for the people of this community themselves, and that push pull between keeping their own identity versus these races that take place growing larger and becoming more known, and what it means globally, but also internally for them, their own culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, and that theme that kind of runs throughout those films this idea is resistance, basically, standing up for yourself and persevering. So that was something that was, I found really interesting, and my team found really interesting when we were trying to look at how to tell this story. The one thing we did want to do is kind of center the voices of people from the Tarahumara community. They refer to themselves as the Raramuri. You have Irma Chavez, who's this incredible runner and activist in the film, and she's the one who's repeatedly saying, this is a tradition for us that is above and beyond any individual race. It's above and beyond any of individual competition. And, she says it very plainly, like, before outsiders came, and, including you filmmakers, before you guys came, we were running, and we will continue to run. That's our history, and it's one of resistance and survival.
It's also really interesting, really quickly, just that they refer to themselves one way and have become known as something completely different. How did that happen? Like, in terms of being referred to this completely different way that it seems like they don't have a vote on? And what do you think that speaks to, like, in terms of thematically with the story you were telling?
It's a great question. And I think if you had to boil this film down, or this story, into one thing, is that it's really a story about, like, power and culture. I mean, it's like, sounds very heady, but but I think that's what it really is about. And throughout history, this has happened where people in power, whether it's governments or big, powerful entities, they're able to name things and call things the way they want, carve up territories, name things the way they'd like to, whether or not the people there want that or decide that. So Tarahumara is a corruption of it was when the Spanish arrived, according to different accounts, it was a kind of corruption of a mishearing or misunderstanding of a term. So that's part of it. And it's interesting because the people from the Raramuri community, that is their preferred term, they will also sometimes say Tarahumara because it's easier sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a more commonly understood and well-known term. So they'll use they'll code switch to the outside. So, and I have to do that too sometimes, like, especially when in a lot of press accounts, more people have heard of the Tarahumara than they have heard of the Raramuri. So it gets complicated.
What is the gap? Is the film opens with people from this community running, and they're running in sandals, and all of these things that, as we learn throughout the story, become kind of part of this mythology around this running community. As you started to explore the story, what did you find to be the gap, kind of culturally, about running between the Raramuri and the outsiders who would come to run in these races?
It's another great question. What you see at the beginning of the film, they're male runners who are running in, it's called the Rara Hipari. So it's this traditional ball race where basically the runners have carved this hard wooden ball, and they basically kick it in kind of a relay race, just passing the ball along. The different accounts say that these games and they continue to happen over days at a time. So that is a very kind of traditional race, almost, I mean, one that just keeps going and going. That is a kind of core part of the tradition, as is the Arihueta, which is the women's race. And that's a race you see at a different sequence in the film, where it's the women racers basically have a little ring that they pick up with sticks, and they toss that ring into the air. And again, it's got a similar kind of pattern. It's a relay that, that's about pushing forward. So those, according to the participants in the film, that's really these kind of core traditions that continue. I think the difference between that and what some of the outside runners participate in is that the outside runners participate in a competition. It's a friendly competition, and it's one about cultural exchange, but it's still a kind of more finite race. And there is a different worldview about those two kind of types of running. So it's something that we touch on in the film. It's that tension between kind of tradition and then how things are modified or changed when outsiders come in.
Yeah, and what is one of the themes I think is fascinating is that kind of the way that the outsiders look at the Raramuri. There's this romanticizing of them and of the running culture, and even Micah True, who kind of founded this Caballo Blanco race, talks at the beginning about wanting to do it so they can keep, and I think this is a quote, be free of all that worldly crap. Like there's a projection, I think, that other people place on that community. How do they react to that? First of all, is that perception, do you think, accurate? And then how do they react to that?
Yeah, I do think that that's an accurate read on what we, I mean, as much as possible as a documentary filmmaker, I'm trying to let the material speak for itself. Mm-hmm. But I think that that's an accurate read, and it's, Micah made statements like that, and then the best-selling author Christopher McDougall, whose book Born to Run inspired a lot of international runners to come in, also made statements like that. And I think we're all kind of as outsiders guilty of that kind of projection and romanticizing. So part of the goal that I set out in the film was to try to have the film be a kind of talk back, and so have the Raramuri members of the community and the runners kind of talk back to things that they see in the film. For me, one moment, and it was one thing I wanted to see was, in journalism, you often go and get a quote. If like a powerful elected says something about somebody, you go back to them and you say, "Hey, so and so says this. How do you respond to this?" And I thought it was very telling that people really haven't done that with the Raramuri community. There's a lot of speaking for them rather than them speaking back to accounts of their culture and their running traditions. So in the film, I assembled some archival material of people running barefoot, as a result of the craze inspired by Born to Run. And I brought it to Silvino Cubesari's house. Silvino is a veteran Raramuri runner who is makes an appearance in Christopher McDougall's book. He's also in the Texas Monthly article. And I just showed him the footage. And I had no idea what his reaction would be. And as you see in the film, he kind of laughs at first, and then he scoffs and he says, I just don't understand why people who can afford to have good shoes would run barefoot. Why would they want to suffer? And he was kind of incredulous. He said, I grew up having to do this, not because I wanted to, but because that's just the way it was, because of poverty. So I think, that's an interesting instance where, his view is that this wasn't about having minimal footwear or being, closer aligned to the ground. It was just that was what we had available. So I wanted to just highlight that, his perspective. And
Irma Chavez echoes that towards the end of the film as well. You're not honoring us when you don't wear shoes. We don't wear shoes because we have to. Not because
it's like people who spend thousands of dollars to look fashionably homeless. They have their jeans professionally ripped. There's that part in the movie where Christopher McDougall, describes Born to Run as something that can be anything you want it to be. like the way the book is. And I thought it was an interesting, delicate line when it comes to exploring cultures, because like it's obviously good in principle that you would want to explore other cultures. And there's still, though, this danger of personalizing it too far, because for the actual Radomuri, like their culture isn't whatever they want it to be. It's what they are. You know what I mean? Like they don't get a choice in whatever their culture is, because it's what they live. It's their existence. And I think one commonality, I think even with some of the best intended Americans and outsiders in this movie, is them perhaps losing sight of that. Like the idea that there is that contextual difference.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that assessment. I really think that that gets it kind of at the heart. One of the kind of maybe uncomfortable truths of the film is, you know, when are we projecting and reducing a culture to suit our needs, rather than viewing it in its complexity. And I think a good example for me is the 2015 race that we document in the film through archival footage. When, you know, I think for a lot of international runners, this race that happens every year in Urique is a kind of utopia. It's a kind of paradise to be there. And, you know, the reality, the social reality, you know, that there's organized crime, there's small, you know, crime groups tied to big cartels in the area. And in 2015, they came in and there were gunfights and people were killed. And this race for international runners was, and you know, was disrupted, and eventually canceled. And to me, that was a moment when kind of these power relationships that we're talking about, it's when all of the stuff was laid bare. The race is canceled by the Americans, and every person sees, you know, every person and every group sees this event from very different points of view. The international runners and the American runners say, you know, this is not safe. Killings are happening. We need to cancel this and get out of here. The local Mexican electeds and organizers say, wait, gringos, who are you to, you know, you don't have the right to this is happening in our town. You can't cancel this race. And the indigenous Radomuri runners say, we want to run because we need these vouchers for food. So it's a very, very different points of view in this.
Yeah. It's one of the amazing things in the movie is, you know, and a question that I will get to, I think, in a second. Actually, no, I'll just ask it now and then ask the one I was going to ask in a minute. When people would come to run in this race, people would come from outside, and Silvino refers to them, these ultra marathons at the beginning, as mestizo races, mixed race ultra marathons, kind of denoting the outsider nature of them. What did you find that people were looking for, like in documenting this story? Because as you just mentioned, the participants from the area were running for food. They were running for corn and corn vouchers. So when people come from outside, what were they looking for?
It's a great question. The photographer, Luis Escobar, who's in the film and who photographed the very first race between the Tarahumara and you know, the outside runners, you know, he kind of had a smart take. Is that, you know, I think a lot of American and European runners live an unremarkable or unromantic life, as he put it. And so this race is an opportunity to challenge yourself and kind of go beyond your limits. It's a little bit of, it's interesting. Over the last few years, we've seen a growth in ultra marathons. I mean, that is such an intense physical experience to run beyond 26.2 miles. I mean, you know, I'm exhausted going from one end of my apartment to the other these days. To push yourself like that is such a remarkable feat. So it is that kind of, we've seen this growth in kind of extreme sports and really pushing the human body to its limits. So I think that's part of it. And the other part is a kind of like street cred, right? Mm-hmm. So you go to a place like this and it's, you're able to say, you know, I ran with the Tarahumara. I did this hardcore thing. It's a kind of badge of honor. And rightly so. I mean, it is a truly daunting course in Copper Canyon.
Yeah, I mean, this gives you an idea of what the Copper Canyon looks like. I mean, it's not cushy.
Not at all. And I will just say this so you have nothing but respect for the people who run that course. I did lengths of that course, not even the entire thing, on the back of a 4x4, like looking at a monitor, and I was drenched in sweat just for, for riding along, looking at a monitor. So yeah, I wouldn't have lasted very long on that race. No, it is a truly intense experience. So I think that's part of the draw. It's like any kind of extreme experience. It pushes you and tests you to your limits.
You in your last answer, you talked a little bit about like these actors, the Americans, it's one of the things that is interesting about the story is everybody is, aside from I guess the cartels, well-meaning. The principal characters in this story, the Americans cancel the race because they're worried about people's safety. It's not illegitimate. As a storyteller, how do you tell a story when there isn't necessarily a bad guy?
I maybe it's the way I grew up or the way I do this work, but I genuinely can see the point and the perspective of each person in the film.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's not about never been black and white, never been like, oh, those dumb Americans, they don't get it. First of all, because I'm not from an indigenous community, that's not, I'm not claiming to represent that perspective. What is interesting to me is how an event like the 2015 race, how it can be seen so differently from different perspectives, and to kind of try to have the viewer inhabit those points of view. And I think that's the goal of the film. I mean, not to get too heady, but another filmmaker that I loved kind of early on, and as a student and trying to get into films, was Robert Altman. The Nashville.
Yeah,
was it kind of those films where I was like, wow, this is just amazing.
The overlapping perspectives,
and you end up creating this really amazing portrait of a place. Altman was, talking about show business and music and the city at this particular time, and you end up getting a kind of what's to me a deeper portrait than if it were just a kind of straight drama with one hero character. So I think to me that's what's interesting about documentary, and so that's what I try to do in these interviews. Ryan Van Duzer, the blogger, like I totally understand all of that energy and excitement and want to be there. Nothing but good intentions. I also see the local Mexican perspective with like, wait a second, we have to live here, year round. These gringos just come in and they parachute out. Like,
I empathized a lot more with the local Mexicans, if I'm being totally honest.
I get those perspectives, from the perspective of the race organizers. You're responsible for the safety of a large group of people, and there are killings happening.
Yeah,
I mean, what are you going to do? There are no easy answers, I think.
Well, I think it gets to the point Andy was making about like well-intentioned people can have blind spots that come out of a good place. I'm sure he's not a bad person.
And also too, the blind spot, I think, to sort of the geopolitical politics of from the local Mexican perspective, that these Americans were coming in and unilaterally making these decisions. And often it seemed like from their perspective, they were kind of coming in late to the game while a lot of the grunt work was being done by the locals. And then these sort of big sweeping decisions get made by them. But, I guess the flip side of that perspective would be, or if you're trying to play devil's advocate with it, the Americans coming in bring a lot of infrastructure that otherwise wouldn't be there. They bring, I guess, to some degree, more just pure logistical expertise, or at least they might see themselves as having it. So they might just see themselves as performing what would be their function to this in the first place.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that, the international runners who come in also see that they have the contacts, in the outside world. They can help promote and bring people into the area. But I think that's what's so interesting about all of this is that it is about this power dynamic. And I think I don't have any easy answers in the film, or at least try not to. What I think is interesting is that we ask that question. It's, how do you have an exchange, a kind of cultural exchange like this, where it's more equitable? Like, how do we do that? And that it's complicated, that it's, if people come in, like you see this with, development or foreign aid a lot, right? People in developing countries complain about, powerful governments coming in and saying, this is what you want, rather than listening to the locals about what they actually need and want. That's a classic scenario. So I think that applies on a kind of very small level here. Are the international organizers, were they in this case listening to locals about what they needed? I also think it's worth noting that this 2015 race that caused this big hubbub, Micah True, the race organizer, had recently died too.
Yeah.
There was this kind of power shift too. There's this reorganization that was happening that added to the chaos.
When for me, one of the, I think, powerful themes of the film is this idea. We talk a lot about sport as being something that unites. And there are so many instances in this sort of cultural exchange where that's exactly what's happening. It really is a wonderful thing to see and view. And then there are those moments where people are well-meaning people continue sort of talking past each other and not understanding certain things or whatever it might be. As you were done with this project, looking at that idea of sport or competition as a cultural bridge, what were your sort of beliefs going in, and what did you believe coming out?
I think that that space where people come together and compete, or there's any kind of exchange, is a very important space, a kind of very interesting space. And I what I wouldn't want is people to just assume that because there's a critique or a kind of maybe a reappraisal of events, that I am somehow against kind of cultural exchange. I think quite the opposite. I just think we have to ask ourselves these kind of tough questions. And something I tried to do in the film with Irma, when I would interview her, I would constantly say, well, what insight can I offer? What am I? Why are you even talking to me? What is what are we trying to get at? And I think that process of questioning yields, I think, deeper, more interesting conversations. And look, I mean, this kind of stuff is part of a continuum. I think I do think it would be very interesting if a Raramuri filmmaker in some future time goes back and has access to this footage and makes another version of this. That that we don't have, culture is never fixed, and I don't think we can have any lock on anything. But I do think that it's about kind of questioning some of these power relationships. And look, this is a year when everything's been laid bare, not just in this country but in the world, right? We had this massive pandemic, exposed all of these inequities, and we're in a kind of reckoning, thinking about what kind of country are we going to have, what kind of country are we going to be. And I think not to get too highfalutin about it, but I do think examining and thinking about power and how you can collaborate it's critical. I think it's critical. So again, this is a tiny little story. This isn't a big, this isn't a story about a rivalry between like the Chicago Bulls and some other, massive team. This is about a little teeny tiny race that happens in the basin of the Copper Canyon that most people have never heard of. And yet the issues that it brings to the table, to me, are kind of, some of these big themes that we're wrestling with at this moment in time.
It was interesting watching this movie. I've never seen a 30 for 30 this subtitled before, at least in my recollections. And it's obviously the way it should be in terms of it being predominantly Spanish spoken. But from a filmmaking perspective, like knowing at least a lot of the audience, I'm guessing perhaps incorrectly from a demographic standpoint, you're presenting it to, does it shape the way you present things as a filmmaker?
It's a really good question. I think, the stories that I've been attracted to and that I want to tell often have, big chunks of them in Mexico or Latin America. And so they necessarily mean subtitles. I mean, I think there's enough of this kind of visual, where you see some running like in the Arihueta or the Rarajipari or the race itself, where we can see some of the running. But yeah, it does. It is a challenge to get the subtitles right, and but I do think it's nice for the audience to be able to hear both the spoken Spanish and then also the Raramuri, spoken Raramuri. That was actually something that was a challenge for us, just to have work with translators from the community.
Mm-hmm.
Irma actually consulted and helped us kind of refine, sharpen the meaning of the subtitles, and that was a process. It is always a challenge. I'll tell you, from the first time I've started working and making films and in Spanish for U.S. audiences. The subtitles have always been it's always a challenge.
I mean, the good news is, though, for the audience watching this, they're not going to be able to look at their phones during it. Like, they're going to have to actually keep watching. It's true, though, actually. Like, it's I think, especially in this day and age, where everybody just lives with their alternate screens, they have to watch this movie carefully unless they're fluent in Spanish.
Yeah, or they can watch the movie on the TV and the phone.
Do it.
I know. You'll miss something. I'm telling you, it's going to go past you.
Bernardo Ruiz is a 2-time Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker. The film, the new 30 for 30, is The Infinite Race. It premieres on December 15th at 8 p.m. on ESPN and ESPN Deportes. It is a remarkable 30 for 30. I mean, absolutely keeps in the tradition of what is always an outstanding series. Thank you so much for giving us the time. It really is a great film. It was wonderful to talk to you about it.
It was amazing to talk to you both, and I really appreciate the thoughtful, good questions. I feel like was also not a typical interview, so I really appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate
that very much. I appreciate that a lot. You're welcome back anytime you'd like. Thank you very much.
Best of luck with the movie.
Thank you, guys.
That was that. And I certainly like it when people say nice things about us at the end of interviews.
Well, we could have edited that out, but we
didn't. No, left it in there on purpose.
Artistic decision because we thought it was in the best interest of really presenting the interview as it happened, that everybody saw the way Bernardo Ruiz complimented us.
It's like it's a documentary, Andy. It was a documentary of that day.
I feel like you don't really understand the people of the Copper Canyon without hearing Bernardo compliment us.
I agree.
It's all part of the understanding of this whole cultural experience.
100%. So a couple things. First of all, we're not making this up. It is a great documentary. It debuts on the 15th, which is next week on both ESPN and ESPN Deportes. 8 p.m. on the East Coast. I'm assuming it's 8 p.m. on the West Coast as well. Definitely check it out. The parts that I thought were, really was this. It's a really fascinating look at this way that well-meaning people can talk past each other, and this idea of projection that we have as privileged, Americans, coming from a wealthy country. I'm not talking just like white people, white privileges, people of a wealthy place.
Relative privilege compared to the globe as a whole.
Right. Going to a place where you want to look at people as free of some of the things that bog us down, the material things that bog us down, when in a lot of places they are desperate for some of those material things and the things that we take for granted, and we can pretend what we don't want because we have such
easy access. They don't consider those
to
constraints. They consider those things they would really, really like to have if at all possible.
Again, one group of people there is running for the experience, for the spiritual connection. The other group is running for corn vouchers. It really is a remarkable story. The other thing we'd love to hear from you guys, obviously, this was a taped thing. You can see we changed clothes. I did that from my children's room, the tiny little desk they work at for school, which is why most of my face was like, 3/4 of the way into the screen. But we are very interested in both bringing you guys who support the show a much wider variety of people, which we can do if we can pre-tape things and talk to people on the East Coast and in other countries and other places. But obviously, we want the quality of the show to stay the same as well. So please give us your feedback, both in the chat. You can email us, KamenetzkyBrothers@gmail.com, leave it on Twitter, however you want to do it. We'd love to get some feedback on just making sure the experience stays good for you guys.
We know that you lose some of that interactivity that we
correct
with live guests, and there's obviously going to be a compromise, or compromise might be the wrong word, but there's a trade-off in terms of trying to get that variety, just because of the time zone we're on and the time zone of a lot of guests that we'd be looking to pursue. We enjoy it, and working in radio for years, we understand that you have a lot of guests that were pre-taped, whether the audience realizes it or not. We're looking to have full transparency.
Yeah, we don't want you guys to think it's a live show with the parts that aren't. We can still talk to you, but it's not the same. We can't put up a comment that you leave for the director. You can't ask him a question if it's pre-taped, all that kind of stuff. So
we just want to make sure that you guys are enjoying it and that you liked it. We really enjoyed doing it, but obviously we want to make sure that your experience is enjoyable as well.
Before we go, so we talked Rams earlier in the show, and we'll have all this stuff back up on the podcast, and maybe try to break out this interview as well with Bernardo Ruiz. Paul George signed an extension today with the Clippers, max extension. Do you have the number? It's like $224 million or something. It's a lot of money, to say the least.
It's $190 million.
$190 million, and then it makes it for like added. Something being added to it, so you're going to make a total of like 220, whatever it is. So
226 is guaranteed over the next 5 years.
Right, okay.
190 million added on the 35.4 that he was already making.
Yeah, so consumed with making sure I had the correct windows open to screen share the right interviews and the right trailer that I closed the window that had the Paul George information on it. I am torn between both the understanding, like the teasing about the reaction to it, and really like reminding people like Paul George is excellent at basketball. Like we have the playoff P thing and all that. Paul George is excellent at basketball, and he is a max player.
Here's the problem. Paul George is excellent at basketball. He is also excellent at triggering really good jokes.
Yes.
And sometimes those two realities butt up against each other rather uncomfortably in ways that are very awkwardly and seem like they would be impossible.
I'm quote tweeting you right now.
Right. That are impossible to live in the same space, but they're both true. These are things that can be mutually exclusive. He is one of, at worst, the 20 best basketball players in the league. At the top of his game, he can be a top 10 guy. He is also top 20 at worst, probably top 10 or higher at triggering jokes, often really good ones. So again, uncomfortable reality.
Well, a lot of this gets like it's that contrast is because a max guy means the same thing for Jamal Murray, who's really good, but he's not LeBron James or Anthony Davis. They all fit into the same category of max
Gordon
player.
Hayward.
Correct. Like because the threshold of it's not the bottom end guys who make it's that LeBron, AD, KD, all the Ds, they're underpaid. Like LeBron's upper salary is limited by what the NBA allows star players to be paid. So a lot of guys enter this conversation of are they a max player or not? Paul George absolutely is based on the salary structure, but what he isn't is somebody that you can make your best player, the best player on the team that's going to win a championship. There are people wondering if he can be the second best player. And the whole thing gets skewed because of that. And then you start to get into the obvious playoff disappointments and hitting the side of the backboard and all the other things that go along with Paul George.
He's definitely he is at worst your third best player on a championship team, like absolutely at worst.
He's one of the best two-way players in the league, for sure.
I think he's actually capable of being the second best player on a championship team. And there aren't actually a lot of guys around the league that are that good either. Yes, he is not capable of carrying a team to a championship. Like you can't build a team around him like that. But the truth is there's only a handful of guys around the league that I think you can legitimately make that case for, whether because you've seen them do it already or because you just know how good they are. And you know that if the circumstances were set up correctly, all things being equal and all things being logical, they can do that. But the truth is, when you look at like Pau Gasol, for example, when he was the second option, second best player on those championship teams with Kobe, there were not a lot of guys around the league as good as Pau for that role. That role mattered. And you know what? Pau Gasol got paid a lot of money to do that role with the Lakers. Paul George is a necessary component, or somebody like him, if you want to put yourself in a realistic chance to win a championship.
Yes.
Like if you want to put yourself in at least that type of space. And those type of guys cost a lot of money because they are rare.
And I think we're in one of these moments too, where the perception has been skewed because the Lakers don't just like most teams don't have a 1 in the league and like the 4th in the league. It's like you've got Kawhi Leonard and like the 12th best player, and these things are tiers, they shift, whatever, but people understand what I mean. You're, Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, you're Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. Like you have 2 outstanding elite level players. But at the same time, it doesn't feel good enough because that second guy isn't as good as the team that you're chasing. And, Monty asked an interesting question. Like, I don't know why these teams commit to 4 or 5 years at the max, offer 2 or 3 years at the max, because that's the only way you can get these guys to sign.
Yeah.
If you want to keep them, you have to give them
assuming that's what they want. I mean, some guys want shorter term deals, but if they want long term,
right. And the response to that, he comes back, he says they balk, trade them or let them walk. But the problem is you need a certain amount of these guys to win. It is an imperfect process that allows you to get him. And as Ahmed Yusuf 18 points out, if you lose him, you can't get anyone else back.
Right.
You can't find these guys.
And then in this specific case with the Clippers, everything that you gave up in order to bring in Paul George, which by extension got you Kawhi Leonard, I think it was Jason Concepcion, known on Twitter as Network, pointed out this is essentially the equivalent of being at a poker table and you don't necessarily love your hand. You may like it, but you don't necessarily love it, but you got to see the river. At this point, you've got to see that river card.
They are genuinely pot committed.
Yeah, and that river card might win you that whole pot, but you've already put in so much money with this hand. You have to see the river card.
This is something that we should talk about. One of the interviews we're hoping to schedule is with David Hill. He's a gambler.
Yeah,
you talk to us about gambling and the idea of being pot committed is something that has worked its way into sports in ways well beyond poker. The Clippers had no alternative. Obviously, this whole thing goes to shit if Kawhi leaves and Paul George stays. You have Paul George, no draft picks, and not a ton of flexibility in terms of cap, and more, but not a ton. You got to do it anyway. You have no choice. If George wants to stay and he is willing to sign the deal, it's not a contract I'd be confident ages well because he's not healthy, hasn't been healthy, gets banged up all the time. But if you want to keep Kawhi, you got to show the commitment.
They're in win now mode. You try to win now. You worry about the later. I mean, the Lakers championship teams, that's Kobe's second tour of duty with titles. Those teams, you looked at that saying at some point, those contracts are going to be bad. They leveraged they hemorrhaged assets. They gave up, they would attach picks, to like Derek Fisher or Luke Walton in order to bring in Ramon Sessions and other guys that they were hoping would help out or just to get their books a little cleaner. And at some point the bill comes due, but the trade-off was the Lakers won 2 championships, went to another finals during that period, and for at least a couple more years, put themselves in a realistic discussion to win championships. That's the best you can ask for. At some point, the bill always comes due.
Right. And for the Clippers, like just the unfortunate thing about it is you're doing this, you're making the play, you're making the aggressive play, the play you have to make at a time the Lakers just keep getting better. And they're not, the opening just isn't there right now. It could be there by the end of the year, but right now it's not.
Look, if everybody on that team comes back with the right headspace, they're going to be really, really good.
Great comment from Monty 10. Maybe Paul George will go to Houston for Harden mid-season. Continuing the idea of Paul George being like at the center of every significant trade in NBA history.
I'm telling you, when somebody is eventually going to do, and I hope it's us because we love this stuff, like the oral history of this particular period, like the last 10 years in basketball, Paul George is going to end up this fascinating character in it because he has been tangentially or directly a part of so many pivotal moments over the last 5 to 10 years in the NBA. It's absolutely going to be fascinating.
All right. So we have tomorrow night. We were scheduled to have Sean Hyken, who lives up in Portland and covers the Blazers for Bleacher Report, among other people. And he was going to come on tomorrow because he didn't think he'd be allowed in the building. Turns out he is. He's going to go do some work tomorrow. He's going to join us on Monday. But we got a lot of basketball set up for next week. Sean Hyken on Monday. We've got Jordan Rodriguez coming on Wednesday. Brian Curtis from The Ringer on Thursday. And Claire DeLune, who many people know from Count the Dings and some other stuff on Friday. Fun basketball and pop culture person. Tomorrow night, we might have somebody on, but it's first Lakers game of the preseason. And so we'll be talking a lot of NBA tomorrow night, one way or another. Again, please leave us your comments about
the Bernardo Ruiz
interview.
Setup of it.
Yeah, the experience as much as the interview itself. We want to make sure that we refine this and it works for you guys as well as we can make it work. So again, thanks again to Bernardo Ruiz. And thanks to you for watching, and we will be back tomorrow.
Dank u, Nederland.